Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Chris Cutler, a professor and the Associate Dean of Research at the Faculty of Agriculture. I'm very pleased to welcome you today to a Dalhousie Faculty of Agriculture public talk, Rapid Consumer Insights, Shaping the Canadian Agri-Food System. For today's event, we are thrilled to welcome Dr. Sylvain Charlebois and Ransom Hawley to talk about their exciting collaboration and the potential impacts of insights they are gaining into consumer behavior. I would like to begin by acknowledging that Dalhousie University is located in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. We are all treaty people. During today's session, we encourage you, our viewers, to post your questions in the question and answer box. Depending on the device you're using, the Q&A tool will be on your screen as a default option, or you might have to click the question mark button. You can also use the thumbs up button to show that you like a comment or question published by another viewer. Later on in the program, we'll bring in some of your questions forward for a little live Q&A. We're of course going to try and answer as many questions as we can, but with limited time, we may not be able to get to all of them. Just one final housekeeping note. You can turn on closed captioning for this event by pressing the CC button on your screen. Now, let's get started with some brief introductions about our speakers. Dr. Sylvain Charlebois is a professor in food distribution and policy at Dalhousie's Faculties of Management and Agriculture, and is the scientific director of the Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University. Dr. Charlebois conducts research in the broad areas of food distribution, security, and safety. He has written 4 books and many peer-reviewed and scientific articles, over 500 total during his career. His research has been focused in many newspapers that you're familiar with, including The Economist, the New York Times, Boston Globe, Wall Street Journal, Globe and Mail, National Post, and many more. Welcome, Sylvain.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Sylvain. Ransom Hawley graduated from the Ivy Business School at Western University and spent 7 years in the consumer packaged good industry at SC Johnson, both in sales and marketing. In 2015, after a chance meeting with Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak, Ransom founded Caddle, working with brands like Walmart, P&G, Domino's, Nestle, and Pepsi. Caddle was recently named a MetaBridge Top 15 Canadian Scale-Up and was featured in Maclean's as one of the top 50 fastest growing startups in Canada. Caddle is the largest mobile-first insights platform that rewards Canadians for sharing data and engaging with brands. Welcome, Ransom.
Thanks, Chris. Happy to be here.
Great to have you here. Great to have you. Now, before I invite Sylvain to tell us more about the work of the Agri-Food Analytics Lab, I want to take this opportunity to make an exciting announcement. Today, we are very pleased to announce that Caddle has joined the Agri-Food Analytics Lab as an official partner for the next 3 years, providing a contribution of rapid consumer data valued at over $150,000. This access to data enriches the research and insights of the Agri-Food Analytics Lab significantly by capturing consumer trends in real time. This generous support will significantly enhance the work of the Agri-Food Analytics Lab and Dalhousie, and we would like to thank Caddle for this generous investment. I will now ask Sylvain to tell us more about his lab and how it's providing rapid consumer insights and how those insights are shaping the Canadian agri-food system. Over to you, Sylvain.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. First of all, I want to thank Caddle for the generous contribution. Well, today is the official announcement, but we've been working with Caddle for a while now. I believe since April already, and things are going very, very well. I've enjoyed working with Ransom and his team, but I do want to thank Ransom and Caddle for this generous contribution. It really fits well with our mandate as a lab. The lab was created a few years ago based on a partnership between faculties, the Faculty of Agriculture, the Faculty of Computer Science, and the Faculty of Management. And all three faculties felt that it was important to understand the future of food and to understand forecasting, the use of machine learning, to understand what lies ahead. If there is something that we learned coming out of the pandemic, is that the future is very difficult to predict. And in agri-food in particular, I think for those who are listening in, will appreciate that Canada, generally speaking, if you don't have, if you can't afford to buy good data, if you can't afford to collect good data, as an organization, you often fly in the dark. The government tends to provide some data to industry, to policymakers, to universities, but the data is either incomplete or obsolete often compared to, say, what you would find in the US or in the EU. So that's why really we created the lab, is to understand, better appreciate what lies ahead, but also it is about empowerment through analytics. It's allowing this lab that we created democratizes data. We share data with the public all the time at no charge. We have a website, and if you go on our website, you have access to all of our research, all of our reports in both English and French. And that was very important for the faculties involved in our lab, is to make sure that all parties have access to free data. And it wouldn't be possible without the support of CADDle. The marriage, the announcement today really is due to the fact that CADDle approached us a few months ago, and the company quickly recognized what we needed. We needed quick data. We needed to design instruments very quickly and get out there as quickly as possible, analyze the data, generate good reports that are meaningful to the public, to industry. And since then, we've actually, together, CADDle and the lab, we've generated, I believe, over 10 reports now. And all of these reports have led to really important conversations with Parliament. I personally testified before Parliament in December to MPs as a result of some of the research we're doing. Different provinces, we've been working with 4 different provinces on food security related issues. We've been working also with companies as well, companies that are looking for insight, and it's hard to find. And so this marriage between CADDle and lab and the lab is so critical. It allows us to actually have these meaningful conversations, and I suspect that Ransom will say the same thing. But this is a very powerful unit that we've created together. The other issue, of course, is the fact that universities tend to be a little bit on the slow side in the social science perspective. We do generate a lot of good research, but it tends to take a whole lot of time. And I want to give some credit to Dalhousie University, because the arrangement that we have with our ethics board allows us to release information very quickly. It allows us to execute on surveys very quickly. So I do want to thank the support that we get from the Office of Research, from Dalhousie University, to allow us to do something that most universities can't do. So with the support of CADDle, with the support of Dal, we were able to build something that is absolutely powerful and wonderful. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll ask Chris to go back to Ransom to hear more about CADDle.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Charlebois. That was a great overview of why this relationship is so important and the different elements of it. Ransom, I'll now pass it over to you to tell us a little bit more about CADDle and why you started the company and how it all works. How did you manage to capture such rapid consumer data, and why is that important? Ransom.
Thanks, Chris. I do want to touch on a few things that Sylvain had mentioned first, and it is true. We did seek out Sylvain. He was, all over a lot of the things that we were looking at in LinkedIn, and we thought what a fantastic person to get in touch with to help spread the good word of cattle, and also we think there's a natural connection and complementary offering together. So here we are. I guess 6 months or so later, and we're really enjoying the partnership with Sylvain and Dalhousie. So I will love to share a little bit more about cattle, and I think what Sylvain had touched on was some of the pain points that I was feeling when I was at SC Johnson. So I spent about 7 years there, and we were relying within Canada, we were relying on old data, we were relying on US data, or my personal favorite was defaulting to the most senior person in the room and their opinion, which of course never happened. But we were forced to use data that wasn't relevant. And rewind before COVID, the challenge of not having data that matched the pace of your business has been a problem that's been around for decades. There just hasn't been a good enough solution. And so really, I had this idea, about 3 years before I had actually ended up starting cattle. It took some courage to do that. And you mentioned the chance meeting with the WAS, and that's a different story, but I had essentially put out in the universe, some sort of sign to take the leap into entrepreneurship. And I had the old Woz, co-founder of Apple, tell me to do it, so I took that as a pretty good sign. Anyway, but really, cattle was born out of a need that I saw in sales, in marketing, in trade marketing, and I really just set out to create a platform that I wish I had access to when I was there. And so it would have been about 6 years ago, and 6 years ago we all still had one of these devices within arm's reach of us about 24 hours a day. Maybe then it was only about 80% of Canadians, but and it wasn't an earth-shattering idea. It was just about connecting those dots to enable faster data, so that at that point, it was a very selfish idea, so that I could make better decisions faster in the role that I was doing. And so what cattle is, and you mentioned, how we got here and how we have the ability to provide fast consumer insights, and it's certainly not not an overnight story. So it's been almost 6 years. We're building a marketplace, which means we have a panel of Canadians that we recruit and manage, and we're a 100% Canadian company and focus here within Canada. So we have to recruit and manage those members on a mobile-first platform. So that enables speed, enables efficiencies, and we have to continue to engage them on an active, ongoing, and frequent basis. So we have a metric that's important to us internally. It's daily active users, which is really the first of its kind when you talk about consumer insights. I mean, maybe you're looking at monthly active at best. But within an industry that requires speed, you should be looking at daily active members, because that speaks to how quickly you can collect data. So that's a focus for us, to enable insights in hours instead of months to the clients that we work with. And it requires managing those members. It requires managing clients, because you've got, when you kick something like this off, a chicken and egg scenario. So you've got to build both sides at the same time. So when I say it didn't happen overnight, it's because we've got the scars. While I'm not a doctor, I probably do have a PhD in what not to do as an entrepreneur over the past 6 years. So there's got to be something there worth its salt. But really, what we've built is a platform that helps our clients, and you named a few. We work primarily in consumer packaged goods or fast-moving consumer goods. Like the Pepsis and Nestle's, Unilevers of the world. We also work in grocery retail and working with some analytics firms as well. But we focus on providing the clients that we work with data faster, and because no one's budgets are growing, we do so in a more cost-effective manner as well. Back over to you, Chris. I think I've got to give you a cue.
Thank you, Ransom. That was a great overview and some good insight into the evolution of your company. So thank you both for sharing more about the work that you're doing. And before we start to get into the audience questions, I will ask you a few of my own questions, if you don't mind. Maybe I'll start with Ransom for the first one, but of course I encourage you to each answer both of the questions as we do a little bit of back and forth here. So Ransom, obviously there's been a whole lot of change, as everybody knows, over the past 12 months and how consumers make decisions about products. So, I mean, how do you think this has changed the need for consumer insights and the speed at which you obtain those insights? You've already alluded to that, but could you expand a little bit more on that, Ransom? Thank you.
Yes, of course. So I had talked about the need for fast consumer insights prior to COVID, and that's been a need that's been around for decades. And when you think about a success of a company, it's some equation of team and talent and idea times hustle, but really it's to the power of timing. And the reason I mention that is because COVID has been this Mack truck of gasoline poured onto this fire of the need to understand what consumers are doing, how they're shopping, what's important, where they're shopping. And a quarterly study, which is probably the most frequent you'd see from the clients that we deal with, is not nearly enough. And a lot of clients are, because of cost, executing something like a usage and attitude study, every 3, 4, 5+ years. It's just things are changing so rapidly within COVID that anything prior to COVID, and you think about the dizzying amounts of money spent on things like brand assortment studies, consumer decision trees, any work that categories of teams have done to optimize, in store. All of that stuff is, taken with a grain of salt now because things have changed so dramatically. Behaviors and sentiments and attitudes, and because of the work that we're doing across consumer packaged goods and groceries, we're seeing all these incredibly interesting changes that we can share later that are showing how you need to have a continuing and iterative and agile approach to consumer research, because what was true last week, not just last year, what was true last week may not be true this week, depending on what's going on with COVID and what's going on in the world and within Canada. And then you think about things like channel shifting. And while almost everyone in fast-moving consumer goods are having a banner year, really what determines the success is whether or not they're winning market share. And you look at e-com, and we've got, we had a tracker that we had created, and most banners are failing at e-com. With the exception of Amazon, of course, has been doing it for so long, and 2/3 of Canadians say that they'd switch back to their normal bricks and mortar behavior post pandemic. But if you're looking at who's going to win and lose within this market, it's those that are going to be able to obtain fast consumer insights. They're going to be able to be agile, as well as win in e-com. Back over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Ransom. Great answer. Sylvain, I don't know if you have anything to add to that. Sylvain?
Yeah, I can build on what Ransom just said. I'll use as an example the Super Bowl this weekend. I can tell you right now that a lot of retailers are wondering what's going to happen, or to predict what will happen to Super Bowl sales. And the Super Bowl, for those who aren't aware, is a big deal in the food industry. Lots of sales, especially in food service, but food service in many parts of our country is currently idle when it comes to accommodating patrons in a dining room. And so, but you can't really deliver the same type of food to people's homes. So it's been a struggle. And I think that points to exactly what Ransom is talking about. What was right last week is not necessarily right this week. So And I've been asked this week to predict what may happen with this event over the weekend. It's been very difficult. You can't look back to what happened last year. It's just impossible. Things have changed so much, and so that's been the struggle for the last 10 months or so. And I know that a lot of companies are just scratching their heads and not knowing. As far as e-commerce is concerned, I must say what I'm seeing right now is a movement, is a recognition that e-commerce is here to stay. There's some massive investments. We're looking at $12 billion invested over the next 5 years in retail by grocers in Canada alone. So they're committed, and they were committed before. Is it going to work? Well, the only way to do it is by actually getting to data as much as possible, and they know that. And so that's kind of what we're trying to get at. Chris?
Great answer. Sylvain, I'll go to you for this next question. I mean, and you've kind of alluded to it already. I mean, just as consumers have been impacted, obviously all the players in the agri-food industry have also been impacted by what's been happening the last 12 months. What would you say are the areas of the agri-food industry that have been impacted the most, and in what ways have they been impacted? Sylvain?
Well, of course, food service comes to mind. I think everyone will relate to that one. The restaurant industry has been heavily affected, but I would say not as much as what people think. When you look at the number of employed people in the sector, it's down about 25, 27%. It's not rosy, but it's not a complete disaster either. And right now, consumers, based on our analysis, looking at sales in the sector, we believe that the average household is spending about 27% of its food budget on food process and perhaps consume outside the home. So you can see that really Canadians haven't given up on food service, but will we go back to the 38%, the 38-62 split we had before COVID? I highly doubt. Or if we do go back to the 38-62 split, I don't know when. That's really the big question right now. And that has a huge impact on everything, on the grocerant phenomena, on that blurring line between service and retail. I mean, you're seeing a complete democratization of the supply chain. Kraft Heinz currently operates 3 restaurants in Canada. Kraft Heinz, a CPG company, which has never sold directly to consumer, is now delivering meals to people's homes in Toronto and Montreal. It's called Restaurant 57. Look it up on your phone. I mean, some of these things weren't happening before COVID. So really, you're really seeing things blown up right now.
Yeah. And I mean, and this leads into my next question. And Ransom, maybe I'll go to you for this one. I mean, your background is obviously, and you have a lot of expertise in understanding how companies, should and can adjust to the changing consumer landscape. So can you, building off of what Sylvain mentioned, can you share some examples of how companies in the agri-food space have pivoted during this pandemic era, and how, the research and insights that we're gaining are helping them do that?
Yes, absolutely. I think I also want to build a little bit on what Sylvain had just said. When we look at food service, and this ties into some examples that we saw, we've done work for some of the high volume consumer packaged goods companies and agri-food that are looking in paper and toilet paper and paper towel, some of the household staples and dry pasta and condiments and baking and cleaners, the major cleaning companies as well. So we've got lots of examples to share, and one of which that I think relevant ties back to some of the food service comments that Sylvain have made is, I'm not sure what's going to happen. Will the 27% jump back to the, I think it was 32% or 38%. What we have seen is that even week over week periods where we're measuring changes, you think about when people go out to, let's use dry pasta as an example, when there was this massive stockpiling where you couldn't get some of these staples. And still a bit perplexed as to why paper towel and toilet paper went crazy, but that might be one of those mysteries that we just never solve. But what we saw is that we look at pre-COVID consumption of something like dry pasta, and then people are in lockdown when some of that news came out, that might be 3-4 times the consumption rate of something like dry pasta. And then you start to see a fairly steep decline as people get sick of dry pasta, right? And then this kind of ties as well to some of this food literacy that I know we'll touch on, of individuals stockpiling 12, 24 months of food and being forced to churn through that. So not surprising that you've got these pantries full of stuff that they know and are getting sick of, that they're still picking up their phone to support the local economy, which I love. When I order something from Uber Eats, I now feel good about myself that I'm supporting the local economy. Well, of course, ordering direct might be a little bit better, but there's these reasons to go back to do that, and I think once the pandemic pressure is alleviated, I do think we're going to see it bounce back because of an affordable luxury and a time to go back and experience a bit of normal again. The biggest thing that I would say, across some of those companies in terms of examples that we've done is help our clients understand consumption. So anyone can look at their POS data, and so if you're a consumer packaged goods company, you've got this. Sylvain gave a great example of Kraft Heinz, but you've got this gatekeeper that is a retailer standing between you and the consumer. So it's difficult to know exactly what the consumer is thinking and doing. A lot of the retailers have very advanced, Walmart has an incredible system called Retail Link, which will tell you, by store, by item, by minute what is selling, but that doesn't tell you about consumption. So if I bought 12 months, 24 months worth of paper towel, what does that mean for me as an Irving or a Kruger or Kimberly-Clark or P&G when I forecast next year? So you've got, all these consumer packaged goods companies, of course, depending on how leveraged they are in food service, having banner years, but they're staring down the barrel of 2021 thinking, how the heck am I supposed to lap 2020 with all this, all that crazy volume? And so helping the clients that we work with, which is probably the biggest work that we've done recurring over COVID, understand what consumption looks like in the home. So overall, from baking products, and while there's a scale and a multiple, but every single product that a consumer packaged goods product that we've tested has increased consumption during the COVID period. So whether it's the use of spices for cooking or baking more often, people doing more gardening at home, cleaning at home, people are at home more often, so they're using toilet paper more often, and paper towel. People are cleaning surfaces more often. They're not using towels as often because of the germs that could be associated. So all in all, a 12, 24 month pantry full of a product may actually only be 3 to 6 months worth of that. So it is more good news for consumer packaged goods and grocery, but those are the types of things that we're seeing. And there is one other interesting fact that we found out that for me has stood out when we've been conducting this data. It's really interesting. It was work that we did in alcohol, and it was the idea of vanity purchases. And so you've got specific brands which you're seeing that shift in consumer packaged goods as well, shifting to Kirkland and President's Choice and private label brands. But we saw a bigger shift, and we dug into it in specific spirits categories. So I'll use a masked data point, but let's look at the vodka category. and you've got some vanity purchases and products that may not necessarily be superior products, but they have a perception tied to the brand. So you think about something like Grey Goose. And while purchases were tied to, I want people to see me buying this, and I want people to see me drinking it, or I want people to see me serving this product at home. Now that they're at home and entertaining less, they're happy to trade down to a product that is, of similar quality. And again, that's not a real example, but in vodka. And then we also see in something like whiskey, where if you may have been drinking, so consumers are actually willing to spend more. If you may have been drinking maybe a 12-year, there is appetite to trade up when there is actual premium quality associated with it. So there's been very interesting nuances depending on the category and branding overall that we've been able to help the brands that we work with understand. Back over to you, Chris.
That's really interesting, Ransom. Sylvain, I don't know if you have anything to add to that. I mean, if you learn anything about how companies or industry in the agri-food space have they pivoted during this pandemic, and how the research that you're doing has helped them adjust during this pandemic?
Yeah, no, listening to Ransom's answer, I mean, clearly cattle understands the power of data. And some people may look at surveys and say, oh, it's just a trend. 30% of people like vodka, 20% like this. But I think the work in agri-food is quite important when it comes to data, because it impacts the entire supply chain. And that's what Ransom was talking about. It's not just about understanding what people will buy tomorrow, but it's also about procurement. It's about strategy upstream as well. And, at the Faculty of Agriculture in Truro, I mean, we do teach this stuff about supply chain and understanding how what happens in the retail store will impact farm gate, will impact farmers in the end. And so connecting all the dots is very critical, but it really starts with the consumer and understanding the consumer. And so I really enjoyed Ransom's comments there.
Sylvain, I do want to get to some of the Q&A, and we've got a number of questions here that our viewers have been putting in, but I'll just ask one last question to you. You and I are professors, and we're always trying to generate data, and you specifically are generating a lot of data in the agri-food sector on consumers. And in the last month, you conducted a survey on Canadians and their food literacy, which Ransom alluded to earlier. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those findings?
Yeah, absolutely. So the results of our survey you can find on our website. We have a report ready, both in English and in French. I believe the National Post reported on it today, along with the Canadian Press. And so you'll probably see more of our report in the media over the next few days. Essentially, what we wanted to know with this project is whether or not Canadians are more food literate as a result of COVID. And what we mean by food literacy, it's pretty simple. It's how you make food choices and what influences your choices. Well, first of all, is it health, the economy, the community, the environment? Those are pillars of food literacy. What's important, obviously, health is the number one pillar for Canadians at this point. That's not a surprise given how much attention we've given to public health for the last little while. But we also wanted more. We wanted to measure specific metrics related to knowledge. One of them was the number of recipes people knew, the types of ingredients people have used for the first time. Different indicators that would allow us to understand or appreciate whether or not Canadians are behaving differently in the kitchen. I think everyone knows that we've cooked more, but that's beside the point. Are we actually cooking different things? And are we using different things? And I can tell you, if you look at the report, if Canadians are are slightly more food literate than before COVID, and I would emphasize on the word slightly. The evidence is not particularly strong, and I can dive into to the report in more details, but essentially that's the assessment we made. Ransom looked at the report, so I'm curious to know more about what he thinks about the results. But my assessment of the situation right now is that Canadians are not overly audacious and adventurous in the kitchen. They are busy, no doubt, but they're not necessarily trying new things or experiencing as much as we were expecting.
Ransom, do you have anything to add on to that question? I mean, in terms of food literacy and what, what trends have popped up, if any, over the last 12 months?
Yeah, yes, there were a couple things, and when I saw the data, I'll say I was surprised. I did think that there would be a higher number of new recipes learned by Canadians, right? And this is over 10,000 Canadians across Canada, Canadian representative sample. And it was collected, I think, a week or so ago, right, Sylvain? So, it is recent, real data. And then I started to think about, well, why might that be? And I think it connects back to what is in the pantry, and also tied into how people are shopping now. So if you think about those two things and what you've got in the pantry and the behavior that you had conducted in terms of pantry loading back in March, April, May, you've got to churn through that inventory. When you're going in store to pantry load, it's not necessarily a time to be creative and exploratory. So it's likely that people are using what's in their pantry. Maybe, I think we saw in that study, it was oils and spices as some of the things that they're experimenting with, which isn't earth-shattering, right? It's not like a new type of meat or crazy vegetable or something. I mean, you probably tell I'm not a chef of any sort, but so if you tie in what's in the pantry is driving, okay, I've got to use what's in the pantry, and then in the back of the consumer's mind is, financial stability. And then with that, you tie in how the shopping behavior is changing. So with a greater exploration of and use of e-com. So if I'm going on and shopping on e-com, I'm typing in the types of products that I'm going to purchase, right? Or the brands or the categories. So it's much less of a exploratory process where I might be at a certain shelf and my attention might be at something that I can grab. So you've got that e-com piece of people kind of buying what they know because it's faster and simpler. And then you've also got the people who are going in store, which is still the majority. How they're shopping in store is different. We've done some work in that as well. There's some channel shifting, but overall people are spending less time in store, which is again not surprising. They're getting in, they're doing their shopping. There's anxiety when they go in store because of health and safety and COVID. So they're spending less time browsing and being creative. So while you've got these wins of people at home and cookbook purchases going up, that might be aspirational, right? I'm going to get a cookbook and I'm going to cook, and then there's I'm going to get all these things done at home that I've always been on my bucket list to do. And we did a fun daily survey. We collected some information, and it turns out that stuff's not getting done. Time wasn't the excuse; it was just procrastination. And so when you kind of tie that stuff in, although people are spending more time at home, they've got stuff in the pantry, their shopping habits have changed. So I don't think yet. I do think once that pantry is has been reduced and there's a normalization of COVID, which is not a very great thing to say, but if we were to reconduct this and call it 6 months, maybe even more frequently, I think you'd see a little bit more exploration. But at the same time, habits are built in 60 or so days, depending on what number you subscribe to. So maybe we won't. But yeah, I was surprised. But when you look back at the data and some behaviors and trends and sentiment, it does make sense.
Great, thank you both. There's a lot to consumer literacy around food, isn't there? So I'm going to switch gears now, and I'm going to get into some of the questions that have been posted by some of our viewers. I'm just going to kind of go through these a little bit randomly and based on popularity as well. First question, and maybe I'll go to Sylvain for this one. It's a bit of a social scientist question. This is from an anonymous viewer who's asking, how do you recruit panel members, and how do you ensure that they're representative of the general population when you're doing these sorts of survey sorts of studies? Sylvain.
Actually, I think I'll ask Ransom to respond to that question. He knows the mechanics of the panel in general. So over to you, Ransom.
Great. Yeah. So the data that we collect for Sylvain and Dalhousie is it's all done through our first party panel. So what we do as a platform is we recruit and manage this panel. Everything that we do with our clients is 100% through our panel. And what we do with those members is we reward them for sharing their data and engaging with brands. And for something like a national study, we can simply collect a Gen Pop data set. We can have quotas to make sure we're bringing the right people, or we can weight the data, depending on what practice we'd like to engage with. 95% of what we do is targeted to some subset of the audience, and as part of cattle onboarding, we reward members for completing their profile and telling us more about themselves. So if a client is looking to talk to South Asian new moms in Southern Ontario, because of the data we've collected, we're able to do that targeting at a macro, never individual level. But we can do targeting, and we can get very macro or micro. The other interesting thing to note, and we track obviously very closely with privacy and security, is and we also have a very open dialogue with our member base, is that we none of the clients that we work with in any way, shape, or form want individual or any sort of personal identifiable information. And kind of there is this big company, big data trying to understand more about Ransom or Sylvain. But really all these companies care about is 300 or 500 people that look like Ransom or look like Sylvain to understand more about my behaviors and habits. But that's kind of a long way around of saying our platform, through data we already have, through data that our members have shared, or by running a quick, we call it a screener survey, we might ask, which of the following categories have you purchased in the past 30 days? And if we're looking at dry pasta shoppers as an example, then anyone who responds to dry pasta, we then funnel them into a larger study to find out more about what's important to them and their habits.
Excellent. Ransom, I'll go back to you for another one. Christine has a question for you. I think she knows you. And she's asking, with the pandemic and all the turmoil that's come from that, and that's created a lot of different behavioral, economic, and technological shifts. What consumer trends do you think are going to stick post-pandemic, and what behaviors do you think we're going to revert back to as they would have been pre-pandemic? Ransom?
Well, I'm glad Christine gave me an easy one. That's good. I will say, not that anyone's counting Sylvain, but that's 2 for Ransom, 0 for Sylvain. That's
ouch.
Thanks, Christine. Yeah, what do I think is going to stick? And well, as mentioned earlier, depending on the number, whether it's 21 days or 60 or 70 days takes to build a habit. I think there's, especially with this second lockdown, and I know this is bandwagoning, but when you look at fitness and how people are approaching fitness, I myself, used to have a gym membership, and even kind of through between the first lockdown and the second, I started getting back into it. And then since the lockdown in Ontario, I got pushed back into an at-home gym routine, and things like Peloton offering 2 free months. Depending on how long this lasts, I think we could see a second purge of people going to the gym and finding out ways to do so at home, which saves you time and saves you money. So I do think there's certainly that's certainly a trend that's going to stick. So in order to be successful in industry, you've got to adapt and be able to provide those. And I've seen that happen with the gym that I used to go to, providing a subscription service as well. In terms of consumer packaged goods, I'll let you know something that I don't think is going to stick. I think there's things that have happened where people have experimented, and we've seen some data. So, this is not sample size of one, but a lot of people over the first summer, this past summer, tried gardening at home, and it was there was a huge uplift when you look at those DIY places like Home Depot, Home Hardware, and Lowe's, and creating these backyard gardens and getting these seeds and cultivating. And what we've seen is that it's for the majority of consumers, it's unlikely they're going to continue that next summer because of the work involved. And I think the realization of you do all this work for this tomato plant, and you get you spend weeks, months, and you get a container full of cherry tomatoes, where you could buy a Ontario grown organic cherry tomatoes at the store and save yourself the trouble. In terms of what's sticking, I think what we've done a little bit of work in baking, and that was another massive trend that we saw spike. Trend to be determined, but a massive category that's increased. And it's the reason we think baking will stick a little bit more than something like exploring and creating new recipes and cooking, is because typically what you're baking is something that can be gifted to a friend or family. It's a way to connect. It's also a way, kind of like a simple, affordable treat or luxury. And it's quite simple as well. I mean, you don't need that many ingredients to try a new type of baked good. So we think some of these trends and some of the work we've done digging deeper into baking and baked goods and baking from scratch, and how many people have tried baking from scratch and frequency, we think that's going to stick as well, or see more consumers that are more committed to that as a hobby or pastime that's enjoyable and rewarding.
Great. Yeah, it's really interesting. Growing food is not as easy as people think it is it? And I think people have kind of learned that over the pandemic. And kind of jumping off of that question, and Sylvain, I'll go to you for this one. Have you seen anything in how the food box delivery service has been impacted by COVID-19? I mean, obviously, I would assume it's gone way up. And do you think this has actually helped or hindered food literacy, the ability of people to get perhaps different types of food into their home through a vehicle that they would not have been able to use before? Any changes in how you see the box delivery service growing after COVID? So then.
Yeah, no, great question. I'm not sure who asked the question, but it's a very good one. I mean, my area of research is food distribution and policy, and I've been doing this for over 20 years now, and over the last 20 years, I've been answering really similar questions, really, about pricing, about where food is coming from, about logistics and things like that. But in the last 11 months, I have had to answer questions I've never heard before. And it really often is related to two things. One, how the supply chain works. so people were expecting a transparent supply chain before COVID. They were looking at, where food is coming from, if there's GMO content, for example, those types of things, to what processing is, agents, wholesalers, margins, who pays for what, fees. I mean, those are, there's, and now these days I'm talking about containers in China. I mean, those are things that we have never discussed before until now. So people are absolutely tuned into supply chain economics, which is really a great thing. So understanding where your food is coming from is absolutely critical and very much part of food literacy, which really leads to this person's question about awareness of choice and options. And I think more and more people are taking the time to really understand what options they do have, whether it's online or physically. And that's why we're starting to see consumers looking at other options beyond, let's face it, we have an oligopoly in Canada. We have a few companies controlling food retail in Canada. And so people are either very pleased with that, and while others aren't so much, and they're just looking for other options. And so absolutely, I actually do think, and I would say that the more demand is becoming fragmented, the better, because it actually forces the industry to innovate and offer different products. And so that's really what I'm seeing right now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just looking at the time, we've probably got time for a couple more questions. You guys are giving such good and detailed answers. We're not getting to as many as I initially thought we might. But I've got one here on packaging, and maybe I'll go to Ransom for this one. I'm not sure if you have collected any data on packaging of food and packaging decisions. But the question is that consumers' opinions on plastics in particular seems to be that they kind of want their cake and eat it too. They want to get rid of plastics, but they like having plastics as an option as well. Have you seen any clear data on what the consumer will accept related to packaging? And does the purchasing channels that the consumer is using does that influence their acceptance of different options in packaging? Ransom.
Yes, so I think there's, if you think about the movement pre-COVID of single-use plastics, I mean, there was this groundswell of urgency to reduce the amount of single-use plastics that we consume as globally. It seems like old news and seems like minor when you think about straws before COVID was an issue, right? It's, we should be using paper straws versus plastic straws, and that is a real valid concern. But it seems to pale in comparison in terms of the challenges that we're facing today. And that is reflected in some data that we've collected around single-use plastics. I think we've got a few studies that we've collected at certain points of time around how important those types of things are. And unfortunately, well, we may have something, but I don't know if we have a benchmark prior to COVID. But what we've seen is that throughout COVID, the acceptance of a single-use plastic or packaging that may not be as environmentally friendly or sustainable is higher than it used to be. It's not a dramatic change, but when we do things like max diff claims testing in terms of what's important, so a client may be looking to determine what should be the hero claim on their packaging. And at one point in time, non-GMO was big, organic, plant-based is trendy in terms of how environmentally friendly or are sourced from environmentally sustainable farms or practices has fallen down the list. It's not the bottom of the list, but other things have jumped to the top. Specifically, things like made in Canada and local. If it's a product that is for cleaning, of course, disinfectancy, which has always been important. But now even more so. So I think it is, the reality is, well, it's one that I hope it wasn't. The appetite for single-use plastics or packaging that is less sustainable is higher now because of the challenges that we're facing, right? And what's important to Canadians is making sure that they're safe and they're healthy, and if it means using something once and throwing it out versus using it again, and there's certain things that may not be the perfect timing for reusable containers that are being shipped to store. I know there was a recent announcement of that, and that was happening before. It just so happens that now it's getting a little bit of traction. It may not be the best time, but so the need for understanding what's important in terms of packaging and what your claim should be, and if that hero claim was 100% recyclable plastic, that may be a second or tertiary claim now. Yeah, I don't know if Sylvain, you have anything to add there.
Yeah, absolutely. We on plastics, we got lucky actually, because we do have a partnership with Angus Reid, which is another field house, and it's been going great as well. And we actually collected data in 2019 on plastics and packaging before COVID. And when COVID hit, we basically went back to field and assess perceptions once again using the same instrument. So we were able to compare both. Now in 2019, Canadians weren't willing to pay more for an eco-friendly packaging, but they were expecting it, absolutely. The environment and food safety were basically at par. Now with COVID, food safety once again came back on top. Of course, since the start of COVID, we barely talked about climate change and sustainability. But I mean, let's be honest, parks and oceans don't care about the pandemic. The problem is still there, and consumers know that. So we've seen grocers and companies move forward on the issue of plastics. Most recently, Loblaws partnering with Loop. It was announced this week, actually. But when you look at the program, Loblaws clearly saw our studies because it knows that it can't get more money from consumers to save the planet. So they actually partnered with the Loop. You go to a website to buy products in reusable containers. You get your products shipped to your home. You have to pay a deposit. You get it back when you return your reusable container. But you have to call FedEx, which is a third party, to get your containers from your home delivered to, get this, a site out of the country, so reusable containers get cleaned up. And then, of course, containers are sent back to Canada and they're filled up again. So there is a loop, but that loop may actually create more pollution, not less. And so I do commend Loblaws for tackling what I think is an important issue, which is packaging. Packaging is really a problem in the food industry. But we are looking at an industry that is going through a phase of trial and error. I think we're still trying to figure this thing out. It's not going to be easy because at the end of the day, consumers aren't willing to pay more. And I think because if you are paying more for eco-friendly packaging, it actually becomes a food security issue. And retailers know that. And that's why I think policy-wise, I mean, this agenda is being driven by policy, which is great. The feds are actually forcing industry to change, which is really a good thing. But industry is still trying to figure things out in terms of how to retail, how to empower consumers to save the planet without asking more money for more money.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts to all of this, isn't there? I'm looking at the clock and we're at the top of the hour here. I'm also looking at the questions, and there's a lot of great ones. Some really important topics we didn't hit on, things about food waste and, more questions about how you do surveys and whatnot. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. If we didn't have a chance to get to your questions in the Q&A, or if you'd like to connect with the Analytics Lab or cattle, we've got the contact information up on the screen, and you can reach out to those groups, and perhaps you can get your question answered that way. But for now, we're out of time, and I'd like to thank you for tuning in here today. And of course, I'd like to thank our guest, Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, and Ransom for joining us. It was a great session, and thank you all for joining us. Stay well and take care.